Hey everyone! Recently, something happened that many of us refuse to believe. The Last of Us Part 2, one of the last major AAA exclusives, came out on PC, finally burying the only on PlayStation slogan. But you know what? I don't think that's actually bad. I believe as many players as possible should get to experience good games, regardless of platform. Especially since it's been almost 5 years since the game first released. What's actually bad is that during this time, the company hasn't released anything new for PlayStation 5 in terms of exclusives. Well, there were a couple games, but mainly just remasters and sequels. Not exactly the generation I was expecting when I bought my PS5. And I'm not some hater who's here to gloat. I'm a disappointed fan who's watching a company that created something great destroy their own platform with their own hands. In this video, I want to explain in detail why I think Sony is killing the PlayStation 5 with their actions, and what this means for us as players. Enjoy the video. Let's start with a little journey into the recent past. PlayStation 4 was Sony's absolute triumph. Sales exceeded 117 million consoles, making it one of the most successful in history. But it wasn't just about the numbers. PS4 became home to an incredible library of exclusive games. God of War, which reimagined the entire series and won Game of the Year. Horizon Zero Dawn, a completely new franchise that instantly won players' hearts. Marvel's Spider-Man, which breathed new life into superhero games. Many people bought the console just for this game alone, you know? Bloodborne, which became a cult classic. The Last of Us Part 2, Uncharted 4, Ghost of Tsushima, and the list goes on and on. Sony managed to find the perfect balance between creating new IPs and continuing existing series. They weren't afraid to take risks with new ideas, but they also didn't forget what fans loved about PlayStation. The PS4 had a clear identity. It was a platform for quality single-player games with strong storytelling. Sony understood their audience and gave them exactly what they wanted. There was mutual trust between the company and the players. We knew that if a game was released under the PlayStation Studios banner, it was a guarantee of quality. At minimum, it would be something decent for those who love single-player, story-driven games. And Sony knew we were ready to buy consoles just for their exclusives. It was a mutually beneficial situation based on respect for fans. But something changed, and now we're getting to the heart of the problem. If you ask why we used to buy PlayStation, most would answer for the exclusives, games you couldn't play anywhere except on Sony's console. That was the main reason for choosing PlayStation instead of Xbox or Nintendo. Now let's look at what's happening today. God of War, Spider-Man, Horizon, Uncharted, Ghost of Tsushima, Returnal, The Last of Us, Days Gone. All these games are already available on PC. At the time of recording this video, only Bloodborne, Ratchet & Clank, and Gran Turismo 7 remain true exclusives. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against more players being able to enjoy these wonderful games. The problem is that Sony is diluting the value of their own console. Why should I buy a PlayStation 5 if all the exclusives will come to PC in a year or two, and it's not like there are even more games now? For example, let's compare the number of major new exclusives on PS5 with what PS4 had at the same stage of its life cycle. In the first 3 years, PS4 received Bloodborne, Uncharted 4, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last Guardian, and many other big releases, many of which appeared for the first time. What about PS5? Demon's Souls Remake, Returnal, Ratchet & Clank, Rift Apart, Horizon Forbidden West, and God of War Ragnarok. The last two games also came out on PS4 and are just sequels. So there are only a couple of new games. Sure, they're excellent games, no doubt, but there are too few of them to justify buying a new console, especially when most of them soon come to PC anyway. PlayStation 5 simply doesn't offer the amount of unique content that PS4 did. But why did this happen? Some blame the market because game development gets more expensive every year. True, and game prices are steadily rising too. Personally, I blame the leadership, who probably aren't even gamers themselves. In 2023, Sony announced that by 2026, half of their games would be service games, basically pay-to-win garbage. They said it's not very profitable to spend several years developing one game just to sell it once, or at most twice with a PC re-release. And what do we see? Complete failure, Babylon's Fall, shut down less than a year after release. Destruction All-Stars, a flop that had to be saved by adding it to PS Plus. And the most recent example, Conquered, a game that was shut down just 2 weeks after release, despite millions of dollars in investment and years of development. And that's not even mentioning nearly a dozen games that were simply canceled halfway through. The only success is Helldivers 2. But that's the exception that proves the rule. Sony is trying to compete in a market where there are already established giants like Fortnite, Destiny, Apex Legends, but they simply don't have the necessary experience in this area, or the resources. After all, such games constantly need updates, which takes as much time as developing new games. And how did Sony react to Conquered's failure? They closed Firewalk Studios, a talented team that could have created something magnificent if given the chance to work on what they're good at. This isn't the first case. Remember Pixel Opus, creators of Concrete Genie, or Japan Studio, responsible for many unique Japanese games? Sony seems to have stopped listening to their fans. We asked for new single-player games with deep storytelling. They give us failed service projects. We asked for innovation. They give us remakes. We express concern. They ignore it. All this suggests that Sony now cares more about short-term profit than long-term fan loyalty. And that's a very dangerous path because the response will be similar. In a short period of time, you can lose authority that took years to build. Thankfully, it seems like recently the company's leadership has noticed they're going down the wrong path, canceling 8 out of 12 service games in development, on which they spent some colossal amount of money. Now it's just thrown in the trash. And they want to compensate for expenses at our expense by selling the same games for a second time as remakes or remasters. Although if that money goes toward developing proper games, I'm not even against it. The problem is that if they start now, these games will come out at the end of the generation at best, but in reality somewhere at the beginning of the next one, which also needs to be sold somehow. So there's not much point in buying a PS5 now without games, but they've also raised the price on it. And this is another painful topic. Sony's pricing policy in the middle of the PS5 lifecycle. They raised the price of the console, an unprecedented step that no company had done before. Usually, consoles get cheaper over time, not more expensive. Even the Slim model got more expensive, though the hardware stayed the same, and the digital edition too, without explanation. We'll talk about the Pro a bit later. The standard price for exclusive games has risen to $70, which is now perceived as normal, but until recently was among the most expensive on the market, until Nintendo came along with their $100. And this is while the real wages of most players aren't growing nearly as fast. Instead of creating new games, Sony is actively re-releasing old hits. The Last of Us 1, a remake of a game that already received a PS4 remaster. Horizon Zero Dawn remaster for PS5, a game that's only 7 years old. Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut. Uncharted, Legacy of Thieves Collection. Days Gone remaster, though they'd better have made a sequel, and so on. And I wouldn't have anything against it if these re-releases came at a reasonable price, or offered a free upgrade for owners of the original versions. But no. Sony often asks full or almost full price for old games with just minor improvements. And if you have the old version, you still have to pay extra. Compare this with Microsoft's approach and their Game Pass. For a fixed monthly fee, you get access to hundreds of games, including all new Xbox Game Studios releases on day one. Sony offers PS Plus in a new format, but even in the most expensive tier, you won't get access to new exclusives on release day. Add to this strict restrictions on reselling digital games. You can't sell or give someone a game after you've completed it, as you can with a physical copy. Given that Sony is actively promoting the digital version of PS5, this is becoming an increasingly relevant problem. And now we come to the last straw, the release of PlayStation 5 Pro, a console with a price tag of $800, offering a performance increase of about 45% and some ray tracing improvements. Let's be honest, this is not the kind of upgrade that justifies such a price, especially when we don't have a single game specifically designed to use this additional power. Instead, we're promised patches for existing games, many of which already run at 60 FPS on the regular PS5. Compare this to the approach with PS4 Pro, which cost $400 at release, and came out alongside games like Horizon Zero Dawn that actually showcase the benefits of the improved hardware. It gives the impression that Sony is just trying to squeeze as much money as possible out of their existing audience, without offering compelling enough reasons to upgrade. Yes, there are now versions of games with improvements for the new PSSR, but first, there aren't many, and even those that exist have artifacts and often work even worse than the base version, because PSSR often creates rippling and other defects, which is why even some internal studios are rejecting it. Why Sony decided to release such a console, there are different theories. Mine is that it's a test run for a new system so that developers can learn to work with it for the next generation. There are leaks saying that PS6 will be only 70% more powerful than the base PS5. With simple math, considering that PS5 Pro is 45% more powerful than the regular version, that means the performance increase overall is just 25% for the new generation. And all other improvements will be handed over to artificial intelligence with its features. And okay, the company decided to test a new technology. That's understandable. But then why does it cost such unreasonable money considering that the audience here is acting as testers? There's only one answer to all this. Incompetent leadership who, as I said, probably were never gamers themselves, and therefore, ignoring any user interests, focused on mining money from these very users. And as it turned out, in some things they were right, as someone is buying the Days Gone remaster. But in everything else, they of course missed the mark with Conquered and many other projects, which is why they recently changed leadership, and I hope this will fix something. But even if this happens and they now start up the single-player game development machine, these games will come out at the end of the generation at best, or maybe in the next one. PS6 needs to be sold too. So it turns out that PS5 is Sony's most failed console in decades on the gaming device market, but I still believe in PlayStation. I believe that Sony can change course and return to what made us love this brand. But for this, they need to remember that games are first and foremost art and entertainment, not just a way to make money. What do you think? Do you agree with my analysis, or do you think Sony is moving in the right direction? Share your opinion in the comments. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I plan to continue discussing the state of the industry and reviewing games. Also, write in the comments what you'd like to hear about in future videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.